Hello everybody and welcome back to my own very own Creepypasta fanfiction, A Crystal in the Ruff. Hope you guys are liking it and hope you enjoy it. We're chapter 10 and we gotta hurry up and get into it. If you want to check it out, it's on Wattpad at Tazz1995 Crystal in the Ruff. You should be able to find it. Anyway, let's get into it real quick. Sorry, I had to move my camera. Anyway, the picture above doesn't belong to me. So just so you know, I'll write story owner. Crystal is awoken by her mother, shaking her awake. Crystal, Crystal, wake up, wake up. Her mother's fearful called her while she was shaking her shoulders. Crystal druggily sat up, trying to focus on what was going on. As she noticed, she was laying on the floor in the middle of her room, not in her bed. Crystal's mother still held her by her shoulders, looked her over. What happened? Her mother asked, her voice still full of concern. Crystal put her hand on her head, not knowing what had happened. How did she get there? Did she climb out of bed that night? Why was she in the middle of the floor? But Crystal, not wanting to worry her mother, just said, "I don't know. I guess I must have fallen out of bed and just decided to sleep on the floor." She tried to sound teasing about the last part, even tried for a smile and a laugh. But her mother just shook her head and just looked horrified. "Crystal, you're bleeding," her mother told her severely. Crystal looked down, confused and worried, and when she noticed that she seemed to feel a slight wetness around her nose, she reached her hand and reached up to touch the wetness on her fingers, and she pulled away and saw bright red blood on her fingertips. "How did this happen? Are you all right?" Her fearfully asked her mother. Her mother asked her fearfully, on the verge of panic. I don't know, Mom." Without asking any more questions, Crystal's mom hurriedly helped her up off the floor, and after making sure that Crystal was able to stand, rushed her straight to the bathroom. Chapter 11. Let's hope we can get through this chapter. And as you can see from the picture that is not mine, might get interesting. I looked you all over. I couldn't see anything wrong with you," Crystal's mother told her. "Are you sure you didn't hit your head or something?" Crystal sat in a chair at their dining room. Her dad sitting in a chair across beside her, sitting facing her, concern on his face as he looked between his daughter and his wife. Crystal just shook her head, confused as her family was. "No, Mom, I have no idea how this happened," Crystal told her mother honestly. She couldn't help but feel bad making them all worry so much. Her siblings were now late for school, having wanted to make sure that she was all right. They were standing next to the door, ready to go as soon as they knew it wasn't too serious. Well, I didn't find any serious symptoms that would suggest we need to take her to hospital or anything," he said. "As far as I could tell, it's just a random nosebleed. I have no clue what happened to you, honey." Crystal nodded wearily, not feeling really there at the moment. Her mother continued to look at the other kids and said, "You go ahead to school. Crystal, you can stay home from school so you can get some rest, and we'll keep an eye on you, okay? Plus, you still have to work later." Crystal nodded wearily, but was lost in her thoughts. What did happen to her? Later on that day, when her mother felt she was a lot better about her condition, Crystal was free to go to work. She went to Mr. McCready's house to pick up his pet Labrador and his Huskies for their walk. She had promised her mom that she would call if something came up. She didn't really like Mr. McCready, but they were one of the people that paid her the most, so she did. Plus, her and the dogs usually got along great. As she made her way, she couldn't help but think her mind go back to what happened this morning. Why was she on the floor? Why did she get a random nosebleed? And was this something to do with Zach and her had talked about? Something that Zach and her had talked about? What if the family didn't approve of her being Zach's proxy? What if her and Zach got in trouble? How could she keep her family safe if it was? Crystal was kind of lost in her thoughts she went through her usual routine, her usual route through the local park. She was suddenly snapped out of her thoughts when she swore she could have heard a faint voice on the wind. "Crystal." Crystal stopped and looked around. The faint voice had echoed through the trees and shrubs. But as she looked around, she saw no one for miles. Unable to shake the feeling of being watched, she just put her head down and quickened her pace. 3 days later. Time had gone by since the incident occurred. It was now been 3 days since Crystal had last seen Zack. She tried to tell herself it was all right and that Zack could take care of himself, but as she continued on with her day, she couldn't help but worry about him. She was walking the Mr. McCready's dogs down through the park on a usual road, and she was kind of lost in her thoughts, when suddenly both dogs started barking wildly and going crazy. Crystal had to snap out of her thoughts quickly and grab a hold of both their leashes tighter, keeping them both from going after whatever it was they were trying to go after. She even had to steady her footing. She was shocked as the dogs came to bark angrily and pulling against the harness. She'd never seen either one of these dogs look so nervous and aggravated before. She had been walking them for years, and she'd never even heard them bark, much less bark this loudly and this angrily. She looked around the park, still trying to get her hold on them both. The park was just an open one like you see in paintings, or sometimes in movies, with gated opens, cobblestone paths that led in and out, in certain areas, with maybe 2 fountains somewhere near the middle of the path, winding around the large landscapes. Here and there were iron benches for people to sit on. Crystal was on the shorter path that led from one end of the park to the other, and there was a middle path that you had to pass through on your way out of the park, and there was a path that led straight into the woods. Down the path into the woods seemed to be the very area that the dogs were barking loudly and growling at. Crystal looked, but she couldn't see anything there. But the dogs sure seemed to. Crystal started to have a bad feeling and started to pull the dogs away from there and back into the path they'd been walking on. She tried to continue walking, pulling the dogs and coaxing them into continuing walking. Crystal tried not to look back as the dogs continued walking again, not happy but complying. Crystal, wondering what happened, couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on her as she hurriedly got them out of there. Later that day, Crystal was walking home from a long day of work. She had almost completely forgotten about the incident with Mr. McCready's dog. She'd even managed to walk other dogs through the park without anything happening. She still had a feeling of dread that she just couldn't shake. There was such a feeling of uncommon trouble that poor Crystal couldn't could hardly be aware of what she was doing. Crystal didn't even notice that she was walking, not her usual path home, but was walking on the path that led straight to the park, and how late it had gotten, how much the sun had gone down, and how there was no one around. Crystal had her head down, deep in the thoughts and her worries, when her head snapped up when she heard, "Crystal! Crystal!" Crystal froze, her blood going cold. She just now noticed that she stood in the same path that the dogs had gone crazy earlier, and now it was a little more darker, and now there was a figure standing on the path leading to the woods right in front of her. Standing about 4 feet right in front of her was a white hooded figure. His face was hidden so she couldn't see his face, but she knew it was a man because of the sound of his voice. He just stood there, and even though his face was covered, she could somehow feel the power of his stare on her. "Crystal, you want to come with me into the woods, into the woods." His voice swirling around, hypnotizing her, fogging up her mind. Crystal's body got numbly and couldn't think straight. There was something unnatural and inhuman about the voice. It was 10 times deeper than a normal man. Sorry, my voice can't go that deep. Than a normal man, and even though it sounded raspy over her skin like oil, the man pulled back his hood, revealing a full face. It was nightmarish to behold. His skin was bleached white and scarred up. His hair black and oily, almost like it was alive and trying to strike like a pile of snakes. His mouth was cut and wrenched wide across the bottom part of his face. It looked like it was split open with a knife and never truly healed. But the most nightmare and horrifying thing about the man, was his eyes. His eyes were huge and had no eyelids. They were just giant, white, bloodshot marbles with one piercing pupil right in the middle of them. They were full of so much insanity that you just knew you were in danger, just looking into the man's gaze. Crystal felt her own insanity drop just a nation. That a person could get that crazy was even possible. The man stretched out his hand and beckoned her. "Come here, Crystal. Walk forward," the man ordered to get Crystal again, his voice spilling over her. Crystal found her legs moving without permission, as if no longer her own. In her dizzy state, she couldn't listen to everything the man had told her, She couldn't help but listen to everything the man had told her, in spite of her horror and disgust at his appearance. The fog in her mind the man had caused by the man's voice was too thick. She was a yard and a half away, almost to him, then another voice broke out. "Crystal, no, stop." The voice was calm but angry. It was Zach's voice. Crystal stopped, Zach's voice helping break through some of the fog in her mind and regain control over her legs. The creepy man stilled up and turned to look over his shoulder to see Zach standing there with his mask and gear on, in the grass just a couple feet away. He seemingly had appeared out of thin air. "Proxy, I didn't think you would show up," the creepy man said slyly. "Jeff," Zach said, sounding like he was saying it through clenched teeth. "Don't get any closer, Crystal. Don't listen to what he's telling you," Zach said stiffly. By listening to Zach's voice, Crystal managed to shake her head out of the cloudness enough to take a couple steps backwards, regain control of her leg, putting some distance between her and the madman. The creepy, smiling man snapped his neck back around to face her. "Now, Crystal, you want to come with me into the woods, don't you?" His voice capturing her again. "Tell Zach you want to come in the woods with us, Crystal. Tell him." His hypnotic voice spilling over her like oil. Fog once again filling her mind, making it impossible to speak, but she managed a pathetic voice. "Zach," her tone helpless and pleading. "Crystal, go home. Just stop. Don't listen to him. Go home." His voice sounded angry and upset, but not at Crystal, she hoped. She managed to break free of the man's hold on her, Zach's voice ordering her, somehow managed to get her through the spell she was under. Crystal stumbled, almost falling over. "Run home now. Go. Run home." Zach ordered her again, never taking his focus off Jeff. "As far as you can, as fast as you can. Go now." Crystal was scared but stumbling around, trying to get her too big, so she took off. As Crystal ran at high speed out of the park all the way home, she didn't dare look back the whole time, but she'd hoped Zach wasn't mad at her. She truly hoped he didn't get himself into trouble or killed. One thing was for sure, the family definitely knew about them now, and they weren't happy about it, it would seem. And Crystal's earlier question was answered. They were definitely in big trouble. And that is chapter 10 and 11. So, hope you guys liked it, and I hope you guys are ready for the next one, because it sounds like things are getting interesting between her and Crystal. Hope you guys liked it, and I'll see you guys in the next